I am about to do a video on mixing and mastering. I've been working on a new track for the last couple days, and I decided it would be a really good candidate to show you how I go from just laying down the rough idea for a beat to mixing, EQing, adding effects, enhancing, compressing, sidechain, and then also how I master the song. And the very first thing I'm going to do is play you a little before and after snippet. This first one right here that looks kind of quiet, this is just a bounce down of the rough beat idea. There's no EQ on anything, there's no nothing, and it sounds like this. And then next, I'm going to play you the snippet. This is the fully mastered mixed beat. So let's just go step by step, and I'll show you how I went from this first snippet to this finished second one. Here is the project file, and I'm just going to go channel by channel and show you what I did to everything. As you can see right now, all the plugins are deactivated. The master chain is turned off and deactivated. This is a little vocal sample. And for this, I EQ'd out. It had a lot of low stuff, so I EQ'd out a lot of the lows. And then there was a little bit of like harsh poppy sounds happening in the real high frequencies, so I rolled off some of the treble. And then right here, I'm going to do a little bit of parallel processing in this audio effect rack. There's the dry channel, and then I added some distortion. Just to make it kind of dirty. And then I put a little bit of delay in parallel. Moving on to the good stuff. This is the main clap. So first we just rolled off the lows. You can see that right about here is where the main meat is. So I rolled it off to about 391 hertz. Because there's going to be a snare drum underneath it that's a little beefier, so I didn't want this clap to be too big. It's sort of just like an extra little sizzle on top. Next is a really, really awesome plugin called RC20 Retro Color. It was primarily marketed towards making sounds like old vinyl or old VHS tape, vintage, you know, kind of old worn out cassette kind of sound effects. But I use this for a number of different things. Mainly, if you look right here, I'm just adding a little bit of distortion to the snare. But right here is the cool part. You can pick what frequencies you want to distort really easily. So this would be like down here in the bass, or you can go up here in the highs. I had it from about 16 hertz on, so this is just adding distortion to the treble. And I love that it's just really easy to dial that in like that, because there's a big difference in adding just distortion to a snare than adding just a little bit of like trebly distortion. That's more like using this plugin as a harmonic exciter. Here's the clap without the distortion, and then with it. And it's subtle, and you might even need headphones. But once you listen to it with that distortion, without it, it sounds a little like tinny and weak. It's subtle, but it just gives that clap a little bit of body. Next, this is one of my favorite and most go-to plugins ever. Actually, just Ozone 5, the whole mastering suite. I love it. This is going to add a little bit of like really high-pitched distortion And it's just going to add a little bit of like treble and sparkle. And I've added a bunch of really high-end excitement and then a little bit of high mids. And here's without it, and then here's with it. Without, with it. Once again, pretty subtle, but it's just kind of making the clap sound open. And then next on this clap, here is just the dry. And then in parallel, I ran some reverb. And then one of the things I like about running reverb in parallel, other than it keeps the clap sounding nice and strong and it doesn't wash it out, but I can add auto pan to just the reverb. So this auto pan is going to make the reverb bounce back and forth from the left speaker to the right, but it's not messing with the dry channel at all. So it sounds like this, and you should definitely throw some headphones on if you can. You can hear the... And so here is the unprocessed, uneq'd clap. And here it is with everything. So let's move on to the snare drum. The snare sounds like this. And the first thing I did was just roll off the lows. You can see right here is where like the low mids are peaking. So let's go about right there. And I rolled it off at about 206 hertz. And then I threw some compression on it. This is Rough Rider 3. This is a free plugin, and it just came out like today or yesterday. I've been using Rough Rider 2 for a while, and I love it. And this is what's called a character compressor. And what that means is you notice that it's there. It's almost like an effect. So here's the snare without Rough Rider. And then with it. Just gives it a pop right at the beginning. This is a multi-dynamics compressor. The OTT setting stands for over the top. The OTT in Ableton is kind of like a secret sauce plugin. It is, some say, the sound of EDM. But I just use about 10% of it, and it does just kind of bring things to life and excites it a little bit. Here is without it. And then with it. Once again, I feel like it kind of opens it up a little bit. So let's hear our snare totally dry and then processed. Let me show you what I like to do with hi-hats a lot. This is a pretty common thing that I do all the time. I'm only using one sample, but I'm going to alternate the volume a little bit to kind of create a little bit of movement. This first piece you'll notice is at 0 dB, and then the second hi-hat I have at negative 2.6, and then I alternate those two. So it goes 0, negative 2.6, 0, negative 2.6. And what that does is when a drummer's playing a hi-hat, they're kind of going they're not playing every single note at the exact same robotic volume. So it alternates twice, but then right here where the snare hits, I made this particular hi-hat all the way down to negative 6 dB. And that way it's not adding a harsh harmonic on top of the snare. So every time the snare hits, the hi-hat is only negative 6 dB. But otherwise, it's either at negative 2.6 or it's at 0. So we're, of course, just going to roll off most of the lows. This actually has some weird, like, sub-bass stuff bouncing down here, and it's a hi-hat, so always look out for that. And this plugin is called Soothe, and it's probably, like, the best plugin in the world. It's a harshness plugin, and if you watch it, it's called a smart plugin, meaning like it's analyzing the audio it's being fed. Like you can tell by the way it's dancing, and it detects harsh resonance. And to put it in layman's terms, it's just taking out all the little bad frequencies and just leaving the good ones. Like the hi-hat doesn't sound bad right now, but in a minute we're going to be pushing everything and maximizing everything, and everything is going to be really loud and in your face. And that's when having a plugin like Soothe on a hi-hat is really going to come in handy. You can use it on drums, vocals, absolutely anything. Next, I added an auto pan, and that way the hi-hat will be moving a little bit and just kind of moving back and forth in the stereo field. Here's the kick. I rolled off the lows until about 53, leaving a little bit of sub, but also taking out some of the sub because I'm also going to sidechain the bass to the kick too. And one thing to note, whenever you roll off like low end on a kick, wherever you decide to land, it's good to give it like a little bump up. I'm raising it way up right now, but just a little bit of a bump. And that way you're taking away a little bit, but you're giving a little bit back. And I'm not taking low end away from the kick because I don't want the kick to be like bassy. I totally want the kick to be bassy. I'm taking low end away from the kick because I want to keep my mix clean. So I want the kick to thump, obviously. So instead of just like rolling it off and like leaving it like that, I'm just going to pop that up just a little bit right there. And next, this is the Ozone 5 harmonic exciter again. So I don't need to go over this. I added some high highs and some high mids. Then I'm using the Native Instruments Transient Master, and you want to be careful with these things. Especially on like a kick drum that's such a main part of the beat. You've got your attack and your sustain, basically, are the two knobs. This is just gain. And I like to do them cross-eyed, meaning if I add 10% to the attack, I like to take away 10% from the sustain because that'll actually give it a little bit more attack without pushing this too hard. So this is pretty subtle, and I'll A-B this whole thing in just a second. Let's just move on to this. This is Ozone 5 also. This is the stereo imager. I just want to make sure that my sub frequencies and my bass up to about 150 hertz is in mono. Now, I'm going to put this on the mastering chain and once again make sure my sub bass is in mono when I'm mastering the track. But I want to clean it up as I go, and that way the mastering chain doesn't have to work as hard to get the bass in mono because I'm going to be kind of keeping an eye on it as I go. So right now this plugin, everything's at 0. And if you solo out the sub bass and listen to the kick and watch this meter over here, it's almost in mono. It's doing a little bit of squiggling around. So if I turn this down to negative 100%, now you just see right here, it's a perfect straight line. And let me unmute everything else. Now, all this stuff happening in the stereo field is just treble and mid-range, and then all the bass from 150 hertz down through the sub bass is in mono. And this is a little free plugin called La Petite Excite. It's just a saturator plugin, and it's really simple. There's lows and highs. I use just this high knob on kick drums on almost every song I make. I usually just use this really on about like 1. Just barely turning up some saturation on the highs. And it just gives the kick drum, the very top of the kick drum, just a little push and makes it cut through the mix just a little bit more. All right, here is the bass line. And I made this in Pigments 2, which is the new synth by Arturia that I'm totally in love with. Got the EQ. I just rolled it off until about 30. If you look, This is your main sub hit right here. So I don't want to get too close to it. Leave a little bit of room. Roll it off about right there. Looks good. And next, this is a free plugin called Roth Air. I just did a video on this. It's a free plugin. It adds like crispy top end airiness. I use it on everything. It's one of my favorite plugins. Also use the multi-band dynamics OTT again. And then here is the Ozone 5 imager again. And if you check this out, look at my sub information on this bass line. Holy shit. That is my sub bass, people. That is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen sub bass that bad. So anyway, I'm going to take this band down to -100. And now we have our straight line. It was so bad. I kind of like stair stepped this. I went to, this is like the low mid band, and I brought it down 50%. So it's like mono, halfway in stereo, and then the mids and the highs are in stereo. But yeah, that bass was out of control. And then I added some distortion in parallel really quietly. And the reason I added some distortion in parallel is because I wanted to add a really heavy phaser to it. And this is Phasis. It's Native Instruments' new phaser. The folks at Native Instruments were nice enough to hook me up with the new complete stuff. So I've been playing with these guys. Here is just the distortion with the phaser. And then I threw an auto pan on just that distortion. So now there's an extra little layer of quiet, heavy distortion that's super phased out, and it's going back and forth from left to right. But it's subtle, and like I said, the reason it's in parallel, I still have this dry channel that's completely unaffected, but everything together sounds like this. And now that woo phase effect is in there, but you don't really want to put phase on your bass because that's going to throw your sub out of phase and it's going to make it sound weaker and blah, blah, blah. So this way you have this separate little distortion in parallel, and you can kind of go nuts on that and add phaser and auto pan and all that crap. And then you got the dry bass just chilling right here. And to finish off the bass, I side chained it to the kick drum. So here's Ableton's compressor. Turned it on sidechain mode, put the ratio on infinite, which is what you want when you're sidechaining. Super fast attack and pretty fast release, about -50. And you'll see the gain reduction right here. It's not a super intense sidechaining, just enough to get that bass out of the way from the kick drum and duck it just a little bit. Now let's compare. Here is our bass, dry and unprocessed. And here it is with everything. Here's dry. And processed. Very nice. We got 2 synth leads. These are also made from Pigments 2. EQ, standard, rolled off the lows to about 100. I rolled off some of the super high highs. There was some like harshness. The Ozone 5 harmonic exciter, cranked up some treble and some high mids. Got the OTT again, and just at about 9%. I usually do about 9 or 10% on the OTT, maybe 15 if I'm feeling crazy. Right here, I just copy and pasted that overdrive, phaser, auto pan, parallel effect rack that we just went over on the bass. I just hit copy and paste. And so now that same little rack that's on the bass is on this lead. And I thought that would sort of tie those two together kind of nice. And I think I'd turn the phaser down a little bit. I really wanted the distortion. And also on the auto pan, I slowed the rate down because I didn't want the bass and the lead to be moving from the left to right at the same speed. I wanted them to both be kind of independently moving around, and that's going to create a lot better movement. Then there's just this final lead, which is also Pigments 2. And all I did on that was rolled off the lows and added the OTT. All right, so right now we have this. And before we move on to the mastering chain, I scooted the clap over 7 milliseconds late. And that way it's not hitting exactly when the snare hits. If you put your clap just a little bit late, you'll hear the clap more. And the fact that the snare and clap are kind of like flamming and not hitting at the exact same time makes it sound way, way better. Also, with the hi-hat, I usually put the hi-hat about 2 or 3 milliseconds late, and it puts it in the pocket a little bit more. So let's master this thing. First up on my mastering chain is a very interesting plugin that I got about 6 months ago, I think. It's called True Iron by Kazrog, and I'm actually going to pull up the website real quick. All right, so here's their website, and it's on sale. And as they say, it adds warmth and heft to your tracks and masters. These transformers add weight, heft, and girth to your mixes and masters. Now we're talking. All I do is pull it up. It defaults like this, with just this at 12 o'clock, and this is the default setting. I'll turn it up to about 7. Here's without it. And with it. This one's real subtle. And with. But man, it sounds good. All right. Let's do a little light compression. This is H-Comp. It's a Waves plugin. But you can do this on any compressor. I have the analog turned off. I have the punch turned down. Any of the little bells and whistles on this compressor I don't use. I'm just using the basic ratio, which I have at 3:1. I have a super slow attack, a super fast release, and if you look at the readout here, I want to do around 3 dB of gain reduction. And the snare is the loudest part, and the kick's kind of hitting around 2, and the snare's kind of hitting around 4. That's pretty good. That's just some nice light little compression to glue everything together. And the next thing I'm going to do is some like mild limiting, and I'm going to try to catch some peaks and shave a few more dB off the song and get everything as even as I can before I feed it into a maximizer and really try to push it and make it loud. So before I even open up the limiter, I'm going to look at my master volume over here and just sort of see where I'm at right now. So I'm going to hit play. And when I first hit play, it hit at about -16. And then when the snare hit, it jumped up to -10.6. Watch right here. It's hitting at about -16, but then that snare's really loud and it's jumping up to about -10. I could turn the snare down some, but I like to just do a little bit of soft limiting in this situation too, because the limiter will help me reduce a little bit of dB but it won't sound like the snare got turned down. If I just turn the snare down right now, it's obviously going to be quieter in the mix. So I'm trying to be sort of sneaky with the limiter and smuggle in a little bit of extra snare loudness, but keep everything nice and even before I push it. This is the compressor limiter by GVST, and there's a whole GVST bundle of free plugins, and there's like 30 of them, and I kept about 9 of them. I really like the visualization right here, and that'll help me explain what I'm doing. I'm not going to use the compressor, I'm just going to use this limiter, and you'll see the limiter is on 0 dB right now, meaning it's off and not doing anything. And you'll remember my highest peak was negative 10.5 dB. So if I turn this to, let's say, negative 9 dB, it's still not going to be doing anything. It's not going to be doing anything until I go past negative 10. So let's put it on like negative 13.5. See how this peak right here goes above the white line? That's what I'm cutting off. And you can watch this line. When I move this, that's the limiter. And those are the peaks. And so I'm cutting off the tip of that really loud peak. So here's what's cool about this. If you listen, when I have the plugin off or on, it sounds like the exact same volume either way. Here's with the plugin turned off. And here's with it turned on. And I'm just going to go back and forth. Sounds the same. But watch this. I have the plugin turned back off for right now. And it's still doing the same negative 16 to negative 10.5 jump. But when you turn this on, watch this. It's only jumping from negative 16 to negative 13.5. So basically, I wanted my snare to sound like it was about 6 or 7 decibels louder than the kick. That's how I wanted to mix the sound. But that's pretty unbalanced. And if I try to master that, I'm going to run into a wall sooner because that snare's so loud. But now with this limiter, the snare's only 3 decibels louder than the kick, but it still sounds like it's 6 or 7 decibels louder. And that's what this limiting does. That gets it ready to pump it up and make it loud. Next, we are back to Ozone 5. This is the complete Ozone 5 mastering suite. This is the reverb EQ, and I roll off all the low end on the reverb. This adds just a little bit of like high-end shimmer and just a tiny bit of reverb over the whole track, and it just ties the room together a little bit. This is the harmonic exciter that we've already used 3 or 4 times in the beat already. Same thing, I just boosted the super highs, and just about 1.4 is all on these high mids. And then once again, here's the stereo imager. Let's see what our sub frequencies are doing on this meter over here. That's almost in mono. Because like I said, I wanted to kind of clean up the low end and keep it in mono as I went. But this is almost in mono, and if you look, you'll see it's dancing around a little bit. And you'll see the phase kind of dancing around. So once again, I'm just going to lower this to negative 100. And now we got our perfectly straight line. And now our sub bass is in mono on our mastering chain. And instead of using the Ozone 5 maximizer, I did not use that. Instead, I used the Fab Filter Pro L2. This is probably the most popular limiter that producers use in EDM and hip-hop. And I'm going to hit play, and you'll kind of be able to see the kicks and snares mainly. And you'll see that the snare is a little bit louder than the kick, but not too much, which is what I wanted. And then all I do is just crank this sucker up. And you'll you'll see right here, I'm doing about -3 dB on the snare hits, and I think it said -1.8 on the kicks. That's pretty good. -3 gain reduction is pretty good on your limiter. And as far as loudness, right now we're at about -11.4 LUFS, which is really loud. I know some of y'all like to get into like -9 and 8 because y'all are wild. But 11.4 is good. I like it. If you look right here where it says -14 and then stream, Spotify is at -14 LUF is the cutoff. This master is quite a bit louder than the Spotify limit, but that's actually a good thing. I've been told by producers that are wiser than me that you would rather be turned down a little bit on Spotify rather than giving them something quieter and have them turn you up. So right now this is hitting at about -11, and if I uploaded the song to Spotify, they're going to turn it down to -14. But from what I've been told, that's what you want. And before we get out of here, let's hear the track with the mastering chain completely deactivated and turned off. And let's turn on this mastering chain, and here she is. All right, you guys, that wraps it up. If you have any questions about anything, any of the techniques or the plugins, leave it in the comments. I will definitely get back to you. Be sure to like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let me know what else you'd like me to make a video on, and peace.